Nick, where did you serve your mission?
French Polynesia.
You don't
That's
hear
pretty
that
cool.
today.
Yeah, I lived there from when I was 19 and I came home when I was 21.
No.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, I'm trying to do the math with your age. Does that mean digital film or film?
No. Film. Digital film was about a year after I got home. A little digital camera was like $800 at the time, you know.
Oh,
So it's bad. I only have a fraction of the photos I wish I had, but I lived on Tahiti and an island called Raiatea, and then Hivaoa, which is way up north in the Marquesian Islands. And I had to learn French and Tahitian. And, yeah, it's the only mission in our church where you have to learn 2 languages. And it was incredible. That was an incredible few years. So
When you got that assignment, were you like, WTF? Well, you guys don't curse, do you?
no, WTF wasn't an acronym. And no, I said Pipiti Tahiti because I didn't know it was Papeete. And my grandmother was the one that told me, Nick, it's Papeete, because there was some show. You older people need to tell me, some show in the 70s. There was some show and it was Papeete, and she knew that from this TV show a long time ago.
I have no idea what show this is. Anyone?
National Geographic?
And
Yeah, I don't know.
it was some show that was on TV a while ago, and she knew it. But I lived on Tahiti for my first 6 months, and then moved out to islands up by Bora Bora for 7 months, and then Hivaoa for 4 months, and then back to Tahiti for the rest.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you got the assignment, did you realize that, how did I get the one where I have to learn 2 new languages? Or
Well,
how?
it didn't. It said you will preach the gospel in the French language. And then a neighbor of ours was Tongan, and they said, no, you're going to do it in both. You'll do it in French and Tahitian. And I was like, oh, you got to be kidding. So my dad went to Norway. My next brother went to Tokyo. My next brother went to Dusseldorf. I went to French Polynesia. And while I was there, my brother that's just older than me got his mission called to Oakland, Spanish speaking. And, you know, when you just get beat up every day by your older brother, for him to go to Oakland, California while you're on Tahiti is just, and, it was a magnificent time, really difficult, really lonely, because you only call home at the time. They've changed the rules now, but at the time you only call home twice. You called home on Mother's Day and you called home on Christmas. And so other than that, I would write letters. I lit a candle every night and had a little desk, and I would write a letter home and then mail it off every Monday. So that was our only communication with home. But other than that, it's like leave mom and dad and go to work. But
Tell me about your, what do you call it? Your fellow elder, your partner, your buddy?
yeah,
Do you
companion.
call him your mission
Companion.
companion?
And it depends on the language, because even in French, companion could mean your homosexual partner. And so sometimes you're asked to use a different word other than companion, but in French Polynesia, they know it. My first companion, his name was Maritarangi, and he's a monster. I mean, I'm 5'10", and he's probably 6'5", and I bet he weighs 350 pounds. And he was not happy to come back from this island called Maupiti. If you want to Google it, Maupiti. I mean, this place makes Bora Bora look like Oakland. And he was on Maupiti, and he had to come back to Tahiti to train me as a missionary. And he lived only a few miles from his house. Where we lived on Tahiti was just down the road from where he grew up. So he wasn't too happy with having to come back and train this American on how to speak Tahitian and French and all this stuff. So
He must look like Rocky and Bullwinkle, right? Something
Yeah,
like that. Yeah.
It totally was. It would be like Rob Packard being my mission companion.
But you know what? It's funny because when you said this guy was a monster, he was 6'5". I was like, I know I invited Packard on to be a panelist. Where is he? And he's 6'7".
Oh, no way.
Right, Robert? 6'7"?
Oh, he froze. It looks like
He's frozen.
Frozen.
But yeah, all of our Canadians were native. So if we didn't speak French or Tahitian, there was no speaking. It was very quiet. So
Wow.
it was baptism by fire, you know. So anyway, yeah, it was a magnificent time.
Yeah, that's funny. I remember at a 10X walking with Rob to dinner and a bunch of other people, and I knew that if I was really, if it was a really hot day, I could just stand in his shade. It would just, at 5'6", that's over a foot difference.
Yeah.
Rob, have people used you for shade in the past? Or do you throw them shade? How does it work now? You can't be heard at all. Your mouth is moving like you're a Muppet.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
Yeah, I didn't know that people were using me as a source of shade, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's happened many times.
Yeah, there you go.
Considering it. The weather in California is always gorgeous, so it's not like in Texas where if you stand in the wrong place, you get third-degree burns on your bare feet.
I had a joke in there, but you'd be proud of me. I stifled myself. I did this with my wife before. I said, I just had a really funny joke about you, but I didn't say it. And she said, I'm proud of you. And then she added, but not as proud as I would have been had you said nothing.
Your wife and my wife have been trading notes.
Yeah. So Robert, by the way, told me yesterday his topic for 10X next year, and it's in this little image that I have to, why do software medical device companies need a new quality system standard? I don't know how the audience feels about that.
I'll come watch that.
I try to be controversial, as you know, Joe, and it's really hard when your life is nothing but quality standards. So this is the best I can come up with.
I don't know. You could say, you could just rail on a quality standard that you hate. Why quality standard X sucks by Rob Packard or something like that. Anyhow, we're going to start.
That would be a rant, not really a presentation.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, I got to make it a value-added presentation. So I've even got a graphic designer that's working on slides for me.
Wow.
Wow, that's big.
That is.
Yeah, I'm actually commissioning somebody to create artwork for 10X.
Wow.
Wow.
And I've asked them to see what they can do with your logo, so it fits the rest of my my artwork, because I don't want to have one that's Joe's logo. So I gotta get her to come up with something for 10X.
Bless you. Look at this. And so far in advance?
Yes, organized and stuff.
Unprecedented.
It's like a totally different person. Who is he?
I know. Ever since you've hired staff, now you're out in the car every once in a while. You leave the house. You've been eating better. I mean, it's just.
Yeah. And I take vacations, multiple ones per year. I came back from vacation last week, and I'm going on vacation in September.
Where's the second one going? Where are you taking your next vacation? Oops. Well, we'll find out some other time. Stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen, for another episode where Rob Packard will divulge where he's going on vacation. The only thing we do know right now is that it will be San Diego. He'll be going to San Diego in May. That's all we can definitively say. Nicholas.
Hello. Yorana.
Today's topic is billing and medical coding and reimbursement.
Yeah.
And you've got quite a little crowd here, just eager to suckle on your teat of information.
Thanks, Joe.
Mhm.
I told you last week that my kids saw Elliot Gould in Ocean's 11 and thought it was you.
Mhm.
I said, yeah, that's probably about right.
Mhm.
I don't know your previous history with Barbara Streisand, but probably a good parallel there. I mean, when you watch Ocean's 11, you see Elliot Gould. That is very Joe Hagee. I take it as a compliment.
Oh, I do. Anytime I'm compared to anyone that is recognizable, I think that's pretty good.
That's good.
If you're a person of a certain age back way in like the early 70s, before you were born, they told me I used to look like Woody Allen.
Oh, really?
The comparison didn't age well, but
Pre or post Mia Farrow?
during.
Oh, during. You could have gotten in trouble. And somebody asked me about a month ago if I how I knew you or something, or asked if I knew you, and I said yes, and they said how well, and I said I'll probably have to go to his funeral. Like, we're that close, and
You don't have to come.
I will. It's the least I could do. Let me present this thing, but that was the answer I gave him. I said I know I'm 1F, that I'll probably have to go do that.
Hmm.
Let me just
You have an
check.
interesting set of metrics there.
Yeah,
I wonder what is right below funeral friendship.
got like below a weekend of mine sooner or later, and I'm gonna have to go to Washington. And
Hmm. No, I don't know that I'll be. I don't know that my weight will be in Washington. We'll see.
can
Yep. You see that you have all of 6
Well,
slides today.
Yeah, we're gonna keep it real short. I've got my camera on this screen, and I don't want to bother flipping them around. So
It's
sorry.
fine. It's good. Only for a minute.
Yeah. So that's why I say everyone's gonna sort of regret showing up today, because medical coding is not the most fun, but it's really, really necessary to understand, to have some basic 10-slide understanding of medical coding when you're commercializing a new medical technology. So I don't know, for background, I used to work for Intermountain Healthcare. I did health economics and reimbursement for the organization. I wrote what's called an HTA, a health technology assessment, on all these different technologies, that essentially at the end is a punchline that says, look, this technology works really well and we should reimburse for it. Or, sorry, the evidence is not holding up, we should not reimburse for it. And I left that company, went and started a biotech company with some friends. We left that a little while later, and now I work full-time on these computers over here for Boston Scientific. But when I do these types of things with you, Joe, and it's just NC Anderson Consulting talking. It's not Boston Scientific.
Mhm.
So my full-time job is health economics and market access. So we call it HEMA, H-E-M-A. Every big company like Medtronic and Stryker and Myriad Genetics, they all have different acronyms for people who do what I do. And essentially, it's weighing out, on the manufacturing side, trying to illustrate to payers and hospitals and physicians that the juice is worth the squeeze of adopting our technology. So Boston Scientific may invent a really cool technology, and then insurance companies and hospitals go, well, that's great, but show me how we're going to reimburse for this, or why we should. So that's what I do for a living on this computer over here. So let's just go through this. Can you, Joe, is this presenting all right? Can you see it okay?
Yeah, perfect.
So think of medical coding as a language that if you've spent enough time in those 4 books, there's a few more books I didn't copy, but these are literally spiral bound books that you can buy, a couple of $100s a piece. Some are owned by the AMA, some are owned by essentially Medicare and Medicaid, which is CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. If you spend enough time in those books, you can essentially read this language, and you see I-26.9, 02FP, 3Z0, and so on. And you could look at that and go, oh, by reading this sentence right there, I know that this was a pulmonary embolism patient treated with an ultrasound catheter directed thrombolysis, and they spent a night in the hospital. So that's what this sentence says. And to illustrate that, this thing right here, I-26.9, this is an ICD-10 code, diagnosis code for pulmonary embolism without core pulmonale. This code right here, 02FP3Z0, each one of those letters and numbers means something. They're not just gibberish, they actually mean something. Kind of like an area code and a phone number. You know, in Utah, where I live, it's 801. So if you ever get a phone number from 801, you know it's Utah. It's not haphazard, it's meaningful. Well, same thing with this. This one right here means catheter-directed thrombolysis into the pulmonary branch of the chest. That letter 0 right, or number 0 right there, means the ultrasound was used. This right here is the physician that says, hey, I want to get reimbursed for using ultrasound using transcatheter thrombolysis for a pulmonary embolism. This is the device, and this is the hospital stay. So let me show it to you.
So to be clear then, you've learned French, Tahitian, and medical coding.
Yeah, you could. I mean, it practically is a language. And when you talk with a coder, I'm not a coder. Most people, Joe, I'm glad you brought that up, because it made me stop in my train of thought. Coders usually have an acronym of CPC after their name. So if you go to LinkedIn and you typed in Certified Professional Coder or CPC, that individual, I have a friend of mine, any of you can look her up. I think she's on LinkedIn. Her name is Sandy Rugg, R-U-G-G. Sandy Rugg is a certified professional coder. She used to work for Intermountain Healthcare. I brought her with me to my biotech company, and now she works for United Healthcare. She's a certified professional coder, which means you got to study those books for 6 months. You need to learn how the nomenclature works in those books. And then you take an exam. If you pass the exam with, I think it's 70% or better, you're a CPC. And then there's CPCC, CPCP. There's all these different types of coders. And they read this type of stuff. You know, if I showed this to Sandy, it would probably take her a minute because I don't know how much she does in pulmonary embolism. But if she worked for a pulmonologist, or if she worked in a, you know, critical care unit or something, she could read that and be like, that's a pulmonary embolism, and the guy stayed overnight. And you'd be like, how did you read this gibberish of I26.9 and pull that out? And she goes, well, anything that starts with a letter and has 2 numbers and a dot and another number is an ICD-10 diagnosis code. This big string of numbers and letters, that's certainly an ICD-10 procedure code. This is a CPT code because it's 5 digits. Anything that starts with a letter and has 4 digits after it is a HCPCS code. And any 3-digit number on its own is a DRG, which means the guy stayed overnight in a hospital or stayed 2 midnights in a hospital. So yeah, it literally is a language. And I wouldn't say I'm fluent in it, Joe. I'm fluent in French and Tahitian, but I'm not fluent in this.
Still?
Yeah, I know. I just don't. I have coders over here.
No. I'm talking about the French and Tahitian. You still consider yourself fluent in them?
Yeah, I speak them every day and have for 22 years just to stay
With whom?
myself. I have a lot of time in this room, Joe. I don't want to get into it. So look at this with coding. Think of it as systems of letters and numbers like I just showed. And those are broken out by ICD-10 CM, which is, if I'm not mistaken, it's care management or something to that extent, is the diagnosis code. This is an international classification of diseases, 10th revision, and these are the diagnosis codes. So everything from an ingrown toenail to schizophrenia to, you know, they're all in here. All of these are in this big book, and there's just endless numbers of them. A diagnosis is also a diagnosis-related grouping. This is the type of code that is used in overnight inpatient stays. Not overnight, I keep saying that. Inpatient stays, which is defined as 2 midnights in the hospital. There's also procedure
I'm
codes.
sorry, that is overnight. What do you mean?
So if you checked into the hospital at 7 a.m. and you had surgery, and the doc says, you know what, I want to keep you overnight, and you stay past midnight and you check out of the hospital at 6 a.m., 7 a.m., that's not inpatient because you haven't stayed in the hospital for 2 midnights. You were only there 1 midnight. So,
And that's considered outpatient?
yes.
That's interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah, anything fewer than 2 midnights is outpatient. So you could check into the hospital at 12:01 a.m. and you would have to stay almost 3 days to hit 2 midnights because you missed the first midnight by 1 minute.
And that would make a difference in how much the hospital's reimbursed.
Correct. That makes a big, big difference on how the hospital's reimbursed.
So someone somewhere in a financial office swearing when they get a patient at 12:02?
Perhaps. It would depend on what the procedure is because the hospital also has an incentive to kick you out as fast as they can so they can get another billable event.
Right.
If they have plenty of hospital beds and they're in the middle of nowhere, Colorado, they could keep you as long as they want.
I want to invite the audience here to type in your questions and comments because we've already established that Nick and I are quite close. I enjoy the sound of his voice and he tells stories and I'm like, how does anybody, you know, I just enjoy your intelligence. But I'm thinking like that previous slide with the reading lovely, dibbly, I with a Z and then you have a that. I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. But how is that going to help Elizabeth Friedman? She doesn't need to know that.
Well,
She's
that's right.
intrigued. She likes hearing you and you're a handsome spectacle. But do we just find Sandy Rugg and say, hey, we need your help and that's all we need to know?
Yeah.
And the rest
Yes.
of this is entertainment?
No, I mean, you need to know what Sandy's talking about and the whole game of it. Sandy can tell you, here's the code you need, here's what you got to go do, but you as the CEO of your medical device company, you need to understand this. Every bit as you need to understand ISO standards, you got to understand that. You need to understand regulatory. You can't say coding is boring, so I'll just let Sandy do it. Well, if you're the CEO of a medical device company, you need to know what you're doing, because you're going to go tell a physician in Connecticut to bill a certain way. You don't tell them, it's illegal, but you educate them on certain methods. And if you don't know what you're talking about, the doctor's going to think you're an idiot and they won't buy your technology. So this stuff is boring, but like I said, it only hurts for a minute, and then at least you're conversant with Sandy when you hire her as a client. Joe, a question came up. Should we?
I invited Kevin to show his face and to talk to us about it. So give him a moment. And in the meanwhile, let's see. I will ask him to start his video and unmute. There he is. Hey, Kev.
Hey, Jeff.
I thought I'd let you read your comment and share why you know that.
I know that not through any professional experience. That's all personal experience dealing with parents in and out of hospitals and things like that. So that inpatient, outpatient classification is actually pretty critical in terms of being eligible for nursing and rehab services after discharge.
Okay.
Yeah, so some of the additional questions and things will essentially be answered as I go through this a little bit. I'll give you some very real world examples. But let me summarize this column by saying, it's essentially a phone number that in those books on that first slide, those 4 different books, there's just endless rows upon rows upon rows of these types of codes with their description next to it. And think of that as a phone number. And I'll tell you why that's a useful analogy in a second. The next thing we talk about all the time in HEMA, H-E-M-A, Health Economics and Market Access, is coverage. Coverage is the process by which an insurer determines if a product, service, or procedure is covered by one's insurance policy. So you can have all the codes in the world. You can have the right ICD-10-CM code, the right ICD-10-CPS code, the right CPT code, and so on, which means job well done. You've got your phone number in the phone book. But are you going to get anybody to call the number? That's what you're looking for. You want somebody to call the number in the yellow pages. So that's coverage. You've got to convince Aetna, Cigna, and Blue Cross that your technology is worth reimbursing a physician for. So I have a minute. Let me do this. A physician graduates med school. They go to residency for 5 years. They finish residency, and they say, okay, I need to start treating patients. Well, who owns the patient? It's the insurance company. The health insurance company is who all of us pay $2,000 a month to. And we pay our money to the health insurance company. So in some measure, we belong to them. We're asking them to adjudicate those claims when they come through and pay appropriately. Well, when I show up, let's say that hypothetical physician, John Smith, physician, newly minted with his board certification, he raises his hand and says, hey, I would like to treat Aetna members. And Aetna says, okay, we're going to credential you on our health insurance plan. What do you do for a living? And he says, oh, I do brain surgery. And they go, oh, well, we need more brain surgeons in our network. So fill out this credentialing material. It's just a stack of papers. Where did you go to med school? What did you specialize in? Did you subspecialize and so on? You send that back to Aetna, and Aetna says, okay, we are going to credential you. You're now part of the Aetna treatment community. You must obey our medical policies when you treat one of our members. We don't care if you agree with our medical policies. We're not asking for your input. We determine the medical policy, and you treat our members according to those policies. And the physician says, okay, I know they say okay because they signed the agreement. Now they're contracted with Aetna to treat Aetna members. Then they go get contracted with Cigna to treat Cigna members. And they get contracted with BCBS of Florida to treat Blue Cross and Blue Shield Florida patients. And they have agreed by that contract to only treat within that medical policy for ingrown toenail. Well, there's an ICD-10 diagnosis code for ingrown toenail. And if the physician bills the correct CPT code for removal of an ingrown toenail, it gets paid because that's per the medical policy. The research has been done. There's coverage for that procedure. But if the physician bills an ICD-10 code for ingrown toenail and then bills a CPT code for brain surgery, these are not compatible. You don't do brain surgery to fix somebody's ingrown toenail, and it will be denied. And the physician is told, look, why did you do brain surgery on a guy who had an ingrown toenail? And the physician can say, well, a new paper came out yesterday and I thought it was the best thing. And Aetna goes, knock it off. You agreed to treat our members according to our medical policies. And there is no credible evidence that we have reviewed that shows that brain surgery for ingrown toenail extraction is an appropriate ICD-10 plus CPT code marriage. So we're not paying you. Furthermore, if it was gross negligence, which that case would be, you're kicked off our panel and we're going to sue you. So Aetna goes, look, if you want to treat our members—
Aetna will sue the physician?
Yeah, they can. They can. Most of the time, what they would do—
I mean, I thought, hey, you're not going to pay me. That's bad enough. Now you're suing me for what?
yeah, so in this case, in those types of cases, they're incredibly few and far between. But what happens is it's not necessarily suing them for malpractice. That's not the insurance company's role.
Yeah.
It's suing them for fraudulent billing and fraudulent medical practice billing. So the insurance company goes,
They
wait,
interpret you're not listening to our contract as fraud?
yeah, it's kind of this middle ground of suing them for malpractice, which they don't do, and suing them for inappropriate billing, which they do. So it's kind of this ground, and it's usually done at the state licensing level. The insurance company will go to the state licensing and say, we keep getting bills from this physician for doing brain surgery on ingrown toenail patients, and you guys need to know about this. And we're filing a complaint with the Utah State Board of Medical Licensing. This doc is kicked off our panel. We want nothing to do with him, and we're going to go back and claw money from him that may have been accidentally paid through the billing process. So when you are a credentialed provider with Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross, or whoever, you have to know medical coding, because it's the language that you're speaking to the insurance company to let them know what you did to their member.
I want to just, I'm going to take a little break here and point out to the audience why I love Nick so much, and why I think he's a model for professionals is he's taking dry, like, hey, Joe Hage, how'd you like to listen to a lecture about medical coding? It's like, but it's going to be delivered by Nick. I'm like, oh, okay. You make it tangible. You make us understand it. You tell us an anecdote, a story. And just as a storyteller, and this is basically my life's work when I have a client who's like, how do I get anyone to care about my product or this or that? This is it, folks. Be like Nick.
Thank
Just
you, Joe.
tell it in a way that we can relate to it. It's a gift.
I need to rewrite what I'm going to say at your funeral.
Ah,
You know.
well, this is recorded, so you can just play this clip. Dave asks, Nick, we're going to apply for a CPT code this November. Our medical device is a class 1. It does not fall into any of the existing billing categories. How should we approach this?
Very good question. So in the class 1 FDA classification makes almost no difference whatsoever from a billing, coding, standing, coverage standpoint. Can I ask, was it Dave? Can I ask Dave to wait till my last slide? Because it's what I discussed with Andre earlier this week.
Sure. On Dave's behalf, I say, yes, that's fine.
Okay. So I will get to that exact point, and it has to do with the novelty of your device. So remember, when I get to that point, that's the answer to Dave's question. This coverage part, Joe, is arguably the hardest part. Coding is just applying for a new code. It takes a couple of years if you need a new CPT code, because you have to prove to the American Medical Association that there's not a code that sufficiently represents what you do. And they ask for 3 years of data. It's a big headache, but it's essentially applying for a phone number. Getting the coverage is the hard part. That's where you've got to do what we call market access. You have to run around the country and convince insurance companies to change their medical policies to pay physicians for using your device. And then the last one is the payment. That's the actual dollar amount furnished to the by the payer to the provider. So that's essentially the phone bill. That also is relatively easy compared to coverage. Coverage is the hard part. Coverage is what I get paid for as a consultant. My job as a consultant very rarely has anything to do with coding. Nick, will you go get us a new CPT code? Nick, will you go get us a new HCPCS code? It always has to do with coverage. Nick, how do we get Aetna to reimburse physicians when they use our device? And I go, okay, here we go. Get ready for 3 years worth of consulting work, and let's figure this out. The payment bit is at the end. The payment is saying, Okay, now the doctor has used your device, reimburse them $300. Please don't reimburse them $100 or they'll stop buying our device. So here's that example. All these numbers and letters in blue are the ones from that second slide where I said medical coding is a language. So this is a sample of the most common codes. They're used in various combinations to describe what was done. This is a product that I have a lot to do with. You can see it right here, EKOS on this little transducer thing. This is EcoSonic. Boston Scientific owns this product. And it is a catheter that runs up your femoral vein, up into your heart, through your heart into your lungs, and you stick it into the pulmonary embolism. And that's the catheter right there, the end of this little curly Q right here. There's ultrasound in that. So you stick it inside the blood clot that's inside the patient's lung. You turn on the ultrasound and you turn on TPA, and it breaks up that clot so that you can breathe again. Well, here's the definition of each of those codes from that second slide. I26.9 is pulmonary embolism. DRG 166 is other respiratory system, 02FP 3Z0 is fragmentation using ultrasound. This is the code the physician would use to bill the insurance company to say, hey, I did all of these things on your patient, had this disease, I expect to get paid, and here's the billing code that represents that procedure. And then here's what's called the HCPCS code, HCPCS, Healthcare Common Procedural Coding System. We just call it a HCPCS code. This is technically a HCPCS code too, but I shouldn't even have told you that. It's just more muddying the discussion. But this is a HCPCS level 1 code. This is a HCPCS level 2 code. And this tells the insurance company, hey, I spend a certain amount of money on your member who had pulmonary embolism. I use a catheter, a guiding catheter, and I want to get reimbursed $500. So when you use these codes, like I showed on that second slide, the insurance company reads those codes, and if this plus this plus this plus this is in our medical policy for pulmonary embolism patients, then we'll reimburse you. If it's not, if you use the wrong CPT code with the wrong ICD-10 code, then you're telling us that a patient had pulmonary embolism and you chose to amputate their leg. And the insurance company goes, incorrect. We don't pay for leg amputations for pulmonary embolism.
Okay, so this code from page 2, is that universal across all insurers?
Yes. Every insurance company in the United States uses ICD-10, CPT, DRG.
Now, my question is, if you bring us back to that phone, you don't have to, but the phone number string of I26.9 type of thing, would I go to Blue Cross and say, here's the code I'm applying for, and do the same exact one for each provider?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, whether you're treating pulmonary embolism in New Hampshire or San Diego, it doesn't matter. You're going to use these same, they're nationwide.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's the.
And universally interpreted, I guess, is the way it interprets it the same way that Blue Cross does.
Correct. So this 02FP3Z0,
Mm-hmm.
that is universal across the entire United States. If anybody were to read that, the 0 means the lung, the 2 means the pulmonary branch,
Okay.
so on and so forth.
So for this product, for example, is this the only viable answer, this particular code? Or could a digit, is there some discretion or decision in there where you change a number because I want it to be for this or for that?
Yeah, very good question. So that 0 right here, can you see my mouse, Joe?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So the 0 right here means ultrasonic. Well, the only ultrasonic percutaneous pulmonary trunk fragmenter is ECOS. So if Joe Hage and Ed Capabianca get together and start a new company that has an ultrasound, yours is a little different, right? Maybe yours is 3 French and ours is 5 French diameter. You make some differentiation, you can use this same code. And now Boston Scientific and you are butting heads at Aetna because we used to pretty much own this code because we were the only one in the market. Now, maybe it's because of our patent. Maybe our patent allows us to be the only fragmentation pulmonary trunk percutaneous ultrasonic device, right? So you and Ed can't join in the game. But if let's say that's not the case and the two of you invent a new ultrasound pulmonary embolism destroyer, you can bill with this code. Now, what happens?
Now, would Boston Scientific have any recourse of saying, no, that's our code, you can't use that for anything else?
Nope.
They have no recourse.
The only recourse is in HCPCS codes, this one here at the bottom, where CMS screwed up years ago in the skin substitute space, and they assigned HCPCS codes with the brand name.
I'm sorry.
Let's say HCPCS code C1887, which is down here at the bottom.
Hmm.
Let's say that was Boston Scientific transcatheter catheter, right? Well, it said Boston Scientific in it. And
Which
then
by definition could be used by no one else.
right.
And
So,
therefore, someone else had to apply for a new code because we couldn't use and did CMS say, oh, sorry, let me erase the Boston Scientific part?
no, they've tried for years in the skin substitute space, and I think lobbying efforts are working because you love having your own code. It gives you that extra layer of exclusivity. And so when you look at the HCPCS codes for skin substitutes, they're all brand name. But almost, I don't know of anywhere else, I haven't done the research, where that exists. So this one right there, fragmentation pulmonary trunk percutaneous approach ultrasonic, the only device in the world that does that is this one. So until somebody invents another one, we kind of get to use that ICD-10 PCS code, no one else does. So now let me tell you, Joe, here's where this gets, this is where coverage comes back in. So let's say you and Ed do invent another ultrasound catheter device. And you go, well, we know Boston Scientific's been reimbursed for that code for 20 years. So let's just go get an engineer. Let's design that device, and we'll bring it to market, and we'll be millionaires. Well, what's going to happen is there's a chance that Aetna, Cigna, and Blue Cross are going to ask the physician for the notes, and they go, the Joe and Ed device, we don't know what that is. We know what ECOS is, and we're happy to reimburse for it because those guys have 140 peer-reviewed publications. What do you guys have? And you go, we don't have any, but we're just like them. And they go, you're not just like them by virtue of the fact you have a new device. And you go, yeah, but it's just the size of the catheter is different. And they go, well, does that have a tangible difference on the patient? Go do a randomized prospective study, and then we'll reimburse you 02FP3Z0. That's always a tongue twister. 3Z0. And until you do that, we're going to deny you, or we're going to deny physicians for using that code if they use the Joe and Ed device. So just
Ed, why didn't you do this ahead of time so this wasn't an issue?
Yes. So that's please don't ever confuse coding with coverage. That's a very dangerous slope. If you think that, hey, there's a code and it's getting reimbursed for my competitor, I'm just going to use that code and I'll get reimbursed. You're playing with fire. It may work. It probably won't. Ed, did you have a question?
Yeah, in fact, A, thank you for invoking me, and B, I do actually have quite a close situation like this. I don't know if you remember. So there's a U.S. company in Washington State. They developed a urinary catheter for chronic retention, but there is a specific for female, and it even has a pump rather than a valve that is magnetically controlled.
Wow.
So as far as I'm concerned, the main difference is gender specificity of their device versus our device.
Yes.
Anything in your codes talking gender?
I don't know. That's a good question. I've never come across that, but this is what's so hard with medical device things is that, I've invented this new med device and I did it to solve a problem, right? That's just being an inventor and an entrepreneur. And so you hate to say that, your product is just like your competitor. And I'm not saying that you're saying this, Ed, I'm speaking hypothetically, but in coding and billing and those things, you have to talk out of both sides of your mouth. You have to say, we are totally different from our competitor. That's why we invented this and spent $50 million bringing it to market. And then you talk to the insurance companies and go, no, we're just like our competitor. We want to be just like them and get reimbursed. And so the story you tell to the hospital and physicians may be a different story you tell, and they're both true. It's how you sell a minivan to a mom versus a dad.
But the other thing that's actually interesting and helpful is that by knowing their CPT code, can I actually get to how much they're getting reimbursed by the insurance companies?
Yeah.
And that then helps validate my business model to say, I ought to be pricing somewhere around this because we're so similar.
Correct. You can look at their CPT code, and there's a difference between billed, allowed, and paid charges. it gives you an idea, or if you're even in the ballpark, they're doing 100
Right.
bucks, you thought they were doing 5,000, helps you gauge a little bit.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
remember that.
And I recognize my experience is limited, but I'm trying to think of any medical device company that I've worked with that in their presentations, when they're going to battery analysis committees and the like, I don't remember anyone ever having assembled a slide with their phone number with
Yeah,
all the specific codes. That seems like an imperative page to have in the presentation.
yes, because if they're ignorant to it, so I'm involved with a venture capital fund in Salt Lake. And if somebody were to present to us something and I didn't see that, I would wonder, one, are you ignorant to this? And do you think you're just going to open the phone book and copy and paste into your slide deck, which is truly ignorant? Are you ignorant to the fact this may take you years to accomplish? And here you are asking us for 10 million bucks, and you should probably be asking for 40 million. Yeah, I mean, you've got to have a deck in your slide that says, here's what the codes are. We've validated this with a Sandy rug. We have validated this with Nick. We're confident that these codes will go through and be paid appropriately. Here's the reimbursement rates. I mean, is the physician going to use your device and get paid? If they're
Anyone like at your old job, I mean, you're kind of a hybrid because despite having a full-time job and a beautiful family and et cetera, you're hanging out with us, which we deeply appreciate. Is there any way for a startup like Ed's to start having conversations with insurance companies saying, here's the code we're thinking, would you pay under that or not? And if that answer's subjective, because back when I asked them in 1988, Nick Anderson was there and he said yes, but now it's, Bill Smith is there and he said no, he's interpreting it differently. So is it subjective then too?
Yeah, it can be a little bit. And, where you might get Aetna that says, sure, you're just another device. We've seen 1,000 of them in a particular space for this particular treatment. We don't care. We're not going to review you. And then you get another one that's super anal retentive and is like, no, we are going to review you. What if you blow out somebody's urethra, and you're like, how on earth, guys, would I possibly do? And they go, I don't know, prove it. And you're like, oh, okay, we'll prove it to you after we generate some revenue because what you're asking for is ridiculous and expensive. But yeah, I mean, this stuff has to be addressed in people's investment decks. You have to talk about coding. You have to talk about your plan for coverage, and you have to talk about your plan for payment.
Would you say that the way you approached your work at Intermountain, was it prove to me why I should or prove to me why I shouldn't reimburse you? I mean, are we trying to, as somebody says, would you look at you're like, look, I'm busy, or, oh my God, another way to save a patient's life?
No, it's the former. It's the former because we're inundated. I mean, every day we're getting 20 new physicians that have spoken with some new sales rep from some new game-changing technology that's not game-changing. This is what we were talking about last week, Joe, the law of diminishing returns. Rick brought up the point of the Malthusian hypothesis and that type of thing, but in the law of diminishing returns, insurance companies are being inundated with all new medical devices that improve things about this much. These minuscule, incremental, tiny little gains. And we see this all day long. When you're on that side of the table and you're like, let me guess, you're going to diagnose a woman with breast cancer 2 weeks before she normally would have been diagnosed. And to you, that's a 20% improvement that has absolutely no clinical utility. Breast cancer doesn't grow quickly enough that an additional 2 weeks is worth the $5,000 you're asking me to pay. So it wasn't, our hands were put up like this and like, okay, come in, let me review your data. I'll write an HTA. Let's make sure that your medical science is sound and that you do improve outcomes substantially. Let's look at your codes, make sure that your codes work in our healthcare system so that when this ICD-10 code plus this HCPCS plus this CPT come through, that it gets paid appropriately. We'll do that, and then we'll reimburse you. But it was not, even we were even an integrated delivery network. So you would think we were always out looking for new ways to improve our patients' outcomes. But that's why I kind of think IDNs are a farce. I mean, the hospital's job is to suck dollars away from an insurance company. The insurance company is trying their best to hold on to that money from the patients and dispense of it appropriately. And they're just at loggerheads. I mean, we've discussed this on this webinar in the past, but no, Joe, we were not looking at, hallelujah, you just gave us a new way to diagnose a breast cancer patient 2 weeks sooner. maybe 5 years sooner, we would have been like, look, bump that to the high priority, put everything else down, review this now, Nick, don't review this in
I'm thinking about how in conversations about how to raise money, how incredibly few how incredibly few devices get funded by VCs.
Yeah.
It works out to be like, maybe 1% of everything that they get presented in a year. What percent of devices presented to people like you get added for coverage in a year?
So I kept my own list. I opened up a spreadsheet and I put in all the technologies I reviewed and whether we approved them or not, how many peer-reviewed studies there were, how many systematic reviews were done on each
It'd be an interesting PDF to share.
Yeah. I mean, it's really telling.
I don't know if it's proprietary and you can't share it, but
I don't know. I'd have to go look again to see if there's anything in there. But we denied coverage for almost 66% of everything we were asked to approve.
I'm surprised it's that low.
Yeah, and so.
And would
much,
you say that's industry average?
Yeah, because I kept track of all the other payers. I had along the top whether these insurance companies reimburse too, to see if we were an outlier. Like, are we being too stingy at Intermountain? Are we being too liberal? Like, you look, Cologuard, it diagnoses cancer instead of polyps. By the way, I hate Cologuard. I will never get Cologuard. I don't like the technology. Sorry if any of you are involved with Cologuard. They've made a ton of money, so they're doing something right, but it incentivizes patients to get cancer. It says, wait until you get cancer and then use our technology rather than getting a colonoscopy to find a polyp. The sensitivity for polyps with Cologuard 17%. So when we deny,
don't get Nick started on anything having to do with the rectum. I'll tell you that right now.
but I already said blew out urethra. So anyway, that we looked at that and we denied coverage for it. We had to cover it for Medicare for certain political reasons, but we did not cover it on our commercial plan. And the coding was okay. The codes were appropriate for that diagnostic and so on and so forth. But we looked at it and said, I don't like your data. You have no evidence of clinical utility. They still don't. They only have evidence of clinical validity. We're going to deny coverage for it. And despite the fact your codes were correct. So, sorry, I went a little tangential on that, but my job as a payer was to push back on providers who talk with the sales rep in the hallway, and the sales rep says, hey, I have this new cool thing. And the doctor goes, man, I would love to use that. Well, of course you would. You ain't the one paying for it. The insurance company is. So now I've got to look at this and, forgive me, but feel like the adult in the room and say, hold on a minute. Why on earth would you use this medical device called breast tomosynthesis that's 5 times more expensive than mammograms to identify one more high density breast lesion in 50 women? This is really dumb. Why did you fall for this? I'd have these discussions and arguments with physicians all day long, and they go, yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about it that way. So forgive me, Joe, should I go back to this? Should I breeze through these last couple of slides?
Yeah, for sure. You saw value in presenting them, and we'll, keep you as far from the topic as possible. So be the adult in the room and take control of this conversation. Eddie, did we get your question?
Yes, absolutely. And there's a separate conversation because for those listening, we're based in the UK. We're going through a somewhat similar process to gain access to the NHS over here. And it's a little different though. And it's interesting because the NHS is both the payer and the customer.
As it should be.
And they well,
I've been listening to Nikki.
Don't get Nick started on that. Again, it's a multi-year process to get through that with them. My hope, though, is that will also help us build a lot of the economic data that we will need to roll over to talk to the nice people that Nick knows so well.
There you go. And this discussion could go on all day because
of course it could.
The nuances of, well, if you're a urinary catheter and you're this much better, but you don't have this evidence, but you do have this CPT code. I mean, the permutations are endless. So let me show you this real quick. A couple of weeks ago, Joe, I mentioned RVUs, which is part of coding. And RVUs are how physicians get paid. And an RVU is a relative value unit. And it started at Harvard years ago. A professor at Harvard said, how can we figure out a way to equitably pay physicians for what they do, because removing a toenail is totally different from doing a C-section, which is totally different than doing a liver transplant. Well, these all shouldn't be paid the same amount. So they divided up the physician work, let's call it that. And I shouldn't say that because that's this thing. The physician, all that goes into removing a toenail or delivering a baby or doing a liver transplant, into three things. And they said, first is the physician work. How technical is removing a toenail? You know, what mental effort and judgment is really used in removing a toenail? And the stress due to potential patient risk, all of that goes into the physician work. You add that to the practice expense. How expensive is it to remove a toenail? Well, you need a needle, you need a gauze pad, you need some lidocaine, and you need some pliers. So pretty cheap to do this. But you still have to pay rent, right? Whether you're removing a toenail or doing something a little more difficult, you still have to pay rent. And the last one is malpractice. So the malpractice expense. So the physician work plus practice expense plus malpractice equal the RVUs that are paid for removing a toenail. Now let me show you what this looks like in the real world. Here's that code that I mentioned on slide number 2, and I showed it again with the ECOS thing. When a physician does an ECOS treatment on a pulmonary embolism patient, they will bill your insurance company for CPT code 37211. The work RVUs for doing that are 7.75. The practice expense is 1.45, and the malpractice is 2.07. Now, there is no unit here. It's not, Nick, are these dollars or these, what are these? Nothing. It's just 7.75 RVUs, 1.45 practice expense RVUs, and so on. So when a physician bills your insurance company for treating your pulmonary embolism, they're going to bill your insurance company 11.27 RVUs. Now contrast that to the repair of a diaphragm hernia, which pays the most RVUs of any procedure I know of, including heart transplant, liver transplant, any of them. This is the highest paying procedure. A diaphragm hernia usually happens in babies. The diaphragm doesn't close and the intestines come up next to the baby's lungs. And you have to pull everything down, rearrange everything, and then close the diaphragm hernia. It's a major, major procedure. Well, that's 108 work RVUs by comparison. Because this one, all you do is make a cut in the patient's leg, run a catheter up into their lungs, stick it into the pulmonary embolism, and turn the machine on. Still,
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're having technical difficulties. He's frozen, and I'm in no position to continue this presentation without him. So everyone keep your fingers crossed. There we go. You froze for a moment there, and I was paralyzed on stage, like I forgot my lines.
forgive me. So are you okay from this slide to this next one?
Well, we left you when you talked about rearranging a baby's insides and how complex that is. So we saw the RVUs. We understand that RVUs is the unit, whatever that means, and you covered that in a completely separate time that we talked. It was very informative. I've forgotten almost all of it, but it's there for posterity's sake, and I can go back and watch it. And folks, you know the URL where to find all of the videos that we have on this channel. So go ahead and take us to the next page, please. Yes.
Okay. So every CPT code in the world has an associated number of RVUs. And so you have to multiply these RVUs by what's called a conversion factor. And CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, every year comes out with the new RVU rate. And in fact, they just came out with it 3 weeks ago.
And
So
is it typically whatever it was last year times the cost of inflation?
No, you know what's funny? You say that. I'm writing an article for Boston Scientific arguing the RVUs should be adjusted for inflation, but they're not. And so next year, a physician is going to make 3.75% less per RVU than they made this year. It's getting cut by $1.31.
You're saying that the RVU number is decreasing.
The RVU conversion factor. So we take these numbers, 11.2.
Yes, the 34 and change. It was 35 last year.
It actually got cut way more last year. This is 2021. In 2022, it's going to be cut by $1.31.
So it'll be 33 and change, and that's not inflation adjusted, so it's even worse.
Correct.
And the justification for this is what?
So Medicare has been forced by Congress to be budget neutral, which means Congress hands Medicare a few $1 billion and says, that's all you're getting. So if you pay more for transcatheter thrombolysis, then you may want to take away money from repair of diaphragm hernia. If you're going to pay more for this, you got to pay less for this, and on and on and on, because all you're getting is that couple of $1 billion we're giving you.
But every single procedure gets multiplied by the conversion factor.
Correct.
So-
So it's not all down to the conversion. There's other things Medicare pays for. I'm just talking about the conversion factor in RVUs.
Okay.
So, for EDS technology, there's a CPT code for insertion of a urinary catheter. And I don't know what that CPT code is, but there's an associated number of RVUs, whether it be work, practice, well, it's work, practice, and malpractice expense. You multiply those by $34.8931, and you get, the physician will get $393 when they do this CPT code on a member. They'll get $5,973 when they do this one. So it's just that simple. Add up the RVUs, multiply it by whatever the conversion factor is. That's what physicians are going to get reimbursed, plus or minus a little bit. They can bill whatever they want. This is the reimbursement payment rate. So here's what it looks like. I literally just took a screenshot. This is the calendar year 2021 outpatient prospective payment system. Now notice right here, there's our friend 37211. This is thrombolytic into an artery therapy. You get this many physician RVUs or work RVUs. You get this many malpractice and this many facility, which totals 11.27. Now notice there's the in-facility payment. There is no in-office payment. Medicare will not reimburse a physician if they bill for 37211 in the office. It's only reimbursable in the clinic. So this is an additional thing that Nick Anderson and Sandy Rugg will think about. If, as a consultant, you bring us your technology and we go, where are you going to use this? And the doc says, I could totally do this in my, or the CEO says, I could totally do this in the office. And you go, yeah, but you won't get paid. And you go, you mean to tell me I have to do this in the hospital? And we go, yep, unless you know some congressman.
But see now, can't you have multiple codes?
Yeah, so this is only to reimburse physicians. You have now a HCPCS code that reimburses physicians for having bought the thing in the first place. There's a code for the device. There's a code for the procedure.
Okay, so how many codes does the average product have or need?
That first slide with the phone number, that's many of those you have no control over. There's not a chance you're going to get a new ICD-10 diagnosis code. You can, but a startup company can't. Boston Scientific has a hard enough time saying, hey, there's not an adequate descriptor for ingrown toenails in blah, 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 that is what our device is used to treat. We need a new diagnosis code. That's a years-long, multi-million-dollar process. You could get a new CPT code and you can get a new HCPCS code, but you're going to have a very hard time getting a new diagnosis code. Some of those, you just have to identify the one that most appropriately describes what your technology does on the most appropriate patient segment group. So here's the last slide. This is the one to whoever, Dave or whoever it was that answered earlier, asked that question earlier. There's a spectrum that I deal with all day long, mostly in the consulting world, where when a client comes to me and I say, are you a commoditized product like a straight cath, or are you truly novel like transcatheter aortic valve back in 2014? There is a spectrum on here. And it's sometimes difficult for the CEO to admit that they may be closer to this end of the spectrum than they are down here. Because everybody likes to think that their technology is the cat's meow, right? But on the left, here's what's good about it. The trail is blazed. Everybody's heard of a straight cath. One may not need new studies. Coding is set up. You're all good to go. Reimbursement is unmovable, which is good or bad. If this catheter reimburses a physician $100 for putting it in, and the catheter gets reimbursed $300 for the cost of the device, and you're like, hey, I can live with that. Well, great. Reimbursement set up. Insurers are not your problem. Hospitals are. These are boring technologies, but highly lucrative. Because you go, look, Nick, I don't want to talk with you. I don't want to talk with Sandy. I don't want to get a new code. I have a cool new device. It's 20% less expensive and 5% more effective. No insurance company is going to do a new health technology assessment on a commoditized product. We made a decision at Intermountain to stop reviewing pacemakers because there were all these new MR compatible pacemakers and all this. And we're like, look, guys, I can't keep reviewing pacemakers. If you're a pacemaker and you have some evidence, you're going to get, lumped in with all the other ones. And you got to accept the payment rate that we pay for all those. We're not going to review you separately. So in the middle, it's hit or miss. Payer policy review will be necessary. You have to do, they'll do a literature review. You've got to do your own literature review to make sure that you're going to get reimbursed and so on. And then on the right, the trail is yours to blaze. Now, that's a blessing and a curse. You get to blaze the trail and you get to set the narrative. You'll likely need a new HCPCS and CPT code because what you're doing is so unique. Before TABI came about, you had to crack the guy's chest open up his heart, take out his aortic valve and put in a new one and then sew them all up again. This thing is all put in a catheter, you run it up through the leg and you put it inside the valve and you're done. So it was such a quantum leap. It was a unique law of diminishing return. It did not fit into the law of diminishing returns. So this takes many years of work and it's exciting and lucrative, but it could be a disaster. So here's the conclusions. Think of coding as nothing more than nomenclature. It's a phone number in a phone book. That does not mean that anyone's going to call that number. The next thing is new coding is hard to get, but maybe worth the effort for truly novel devices. You need to figure out how to convince payers to pay for your device once you get your coding set up, and consider coding considerations early on in commercialization. Think about coding from day one, because if you do need a new CPT code, it's going to take 3 years. If you need a new HCPCS code, it takes almost 1 year. You have to have your application in the first week of January, and the new code won't go live until January 1st, 2023. So there's a big lag to this. If you're coming to market, if your board of directors thinks you're going to market December 1st, but you find out that you need a new HCPCS code, you're going to market January 1st, 2023. It's going to take that long to convince CMS that you need a new HCPCS code.
I think your the title for your 10X workshop is just 3 hours with Nick Anderson. I mean, it doesn't matter what the title of your presentation is. It's just anything you need to know about market access.
Yeah.
You can pretty much hit you with. It's just your depth of knowledge just continues to astonish me.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it.
So
Q&A.
there are some comments here, and we're already over an hour. Andre just wrote exactly. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to read to you some of the stuff that has been written. Andre writes, a commercial for MDG Premium. Thank you. We have a musculoskeletal pain therapy device under development. He contacted Nick, thanks to Premium, last week, and he's getting on the right track for reimbursement. So hooray for us. And Rick Stockton writes, this is such an effective way to really gain perspective into the mindset of the payer assignment process, which is a true multi-dimensional process.
Yeah.
Good work, Nikki Anderson.
Thank you, Joe.
Eddie has another question. In fact, there are two Eds. So Ed Capabianca writes well, go ahead and read his question aloud and answer it. You see it there. In the reimbursement analysis, is there any area for measuring QALYs, QAYS, or patient quality of life? They are accounted for by NHS.
Yes, absolutely necessary. QALYs, I have a hard time with QALYs because you can always make them work. You can adjust the QALYs to $50,000 or $100,000 or $150,000. The new standard in the United States is roughly $100,000. I think it should go up. But yes, that's part of your health economics. And in the United States, we can't deny coverage based off of cost and prices. In Europe, it's the exact opposite. They take price into consideration all the time, but in the US, you can't. But QALYs and ICERs, ICER, incremental cost effectiveness ratios, insurance companies will look at them and then be like, okay, I didn't look, because I'm not supposed to look at your costs and things. But yeah, Ed, you definitely want to consider ICERs and QALYs. And especially for a technology like yours, in that catheter space, quality adjusted life years is a big deal. We can talk more, but that's a very good question.
Alan writes, how do I get hold of Nick to talk further?
Should I just type my email in here?
Sure.
That's all. I don't have.
You don't have LinkedIn anymore. It's heretical.
I know.
Andre writes a commercial for Alan. Alan, join MDG Premium, and then you can just hit him on our channel. It's a usurious $49 a month. And if you've gotten less than $50 worth of value in this hour, then what the hell are you You're in the wrong business.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. So I don't know where, let's see. Did you just answered show all. Oh, that's funny. You wrote the answer to, I don't think everyone got this. So it's Nicholas, NICHOLAS.C.Anderson. That's ON at gmail.com is the answer to that question. But I'm not going to bring Ed Lynn on, my loquacious friend, at this time in the presentation. But the punchline of his question is, what's the fastest way to get his own unique reimbursement code? And he tells us a bit about his device. And you might remember, Eddie, he's working on an oxygenated mask system that delivers 60% higher oxygen than any other system.
So remember, there's two codes that most people on this call would care about. CPT code, which is how the physician's going to get reimbursed for using your device on a patient, and a HCPCS code, which is reimbursing the physician for having bought your actual device. This one's for their professional services. This one's for your device. So to Ed's question, I don't know which one he's asking about, but if it's CPT, if there's not currently a CPT code that adequately describes what your technology, what a physician does to use your technology, then you need to get a new CPT code. You have to petition the AMA. It takes a few years to do it. It's a headache. To get a new HCPCS code, what we often call a product code, because it describes your product. It's the one that I described earlier, Joe, that has your brand name in it if you're a skin substitute.
Mm-hmm.
You have to fill out an application. You have to send it to CMS by the first week of January. It's the same every single year. You send it to Cynthia Hakey and Judy Wallace. You have to print out 30 copies and put it in a big box and mail it to Maryland. They review it. By May of next year, you'll find out if they're going to grant you a new code. The new code gets sent to insurance companies on October 1st, 2022. And then your new code goes live, meaning physicians must bill with your new HCPCS code on January 1st, 2023. So that one's easy compared to a CPT code.
How, what's the market cap of a company that can afford or typically thinks to hire someone with your background? So for example, in its best year, Cardiac Science, my employer of more than 10 years ago now, if you can believe it, we didn't have a market access specialist. We did 200 million in sales. Boston Scientific clearly is one of the largest medical device companies in the world. Where's the point where people are like, I need to have a Nick Anderson?
So the company that I started with my friends from Johns Hopkins back in 2016, I think I was employee number 4. And I was thrilled that they considered market access, reimbursement, this whole thing. Like literally T equals negative. I mean, I went with the CEO to raise money. It was me, the CEO.
Well, I mean, you're extraordinary.
But thank you. But I mean, I would urge any of these.
Not every, people are not going to hire you. Like, I don't know of anyone else in your stratosphere in terms of really understanding the complete and the strategy and everything. I mean, you're quite gifted. So the average, like, hey, I don't want a Nick Anderson. I just want someone who knows anything about market access. I don't think littler companies would have you in the top 10 employees.
Yeah,
They might have you as a consultant, and I wouldn't even speculate how many don't even know to get a consultant on this. Oh, well, reimbursement, I'll take care of that. It's on my to-do list. Like, that's it.
Yeah. So there's quite a few. I mean, speaking of LinkedIn, if you go to LinkedIn and you type in market access, you're going to find people from J&J and Boston Scientific and all these types of companies. So that does speak to the higher market cap groups that have market access, health economics, divisions inside the company. But if your company has 20 employees, you're 2 years from commercializing, you should hire somebody. I mean, you should have,
Yes, but you do. So in your experience, how big is a company when they start thinking about this? Because I'm not aware, I mean, really up until I met you, I wasn't aware of this specialty. I knew about product development, I knew about marketing, I knew about ops and engineering. I never thought of where's the market access department at this company.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that, Joe. It's tricky because in my perspective, in fact, the CEO of Roche, the largest medical device company in the world, was asked 2 years ago.
But Medtronic was.
Well, the largest diagnostic company. Did I say med device?
You did.
Abbott's the largest device. Roche is the largest diagnostic company. The CEO was asked, if you were to go start your own company brand new, who would the first employee be that you hired? And he said, market access. So the whole idea of health economics, insurance companies as the customer has changed since, I argue, since 2002 when PubMed went live, because it allows insurance companies to push back on physicians and say, hold on. For the last 30 years, you guys have ran the show, and you went wave running in the Bahamas with Medtronic, and you flew to the Alps with, to go skiing with Pfizer. The Sunshine Act changed that. And also the internet changed it. And now insurance companies went, hold on, what do you want to do to our member? And the physician would say, look, don't argue with me. I'm the doctor. You guys pay me for what I do. I know what I need to do. Well, then PubMed went live in 2002, and it's just got better since then. Insurance companies started to hire people like me and say, Nick, push back. And physicians went, we are not used to this pushback. We used to just get paid for what we did, and it was wonderful. Now, who's this pipsqueak named Nick Anderson pushing back on me? And the insurance company went, this is what we wished we could have been doing the last 20 years, but we couldn't hire people to go look through card catalogs at the local library for medical publications. So there was a tidal shift in the early 2000s, and now it's moved its way all the way into the industry, where medical device companies are saying to sales and marketing, we'll talk to you guys after we talk with HEMA. When we talk with health economics and market access, then we'll talk with sales and marketing. And sales and marketing is like, wait, who are these dorks over here in health economics and market access, poring over literature, looking at coding scenarios, looking at the new OPPS rule from Medicare last week? Like, why are these guys running the show? I'm the salesman. I'm the one that has the relationship with the physician. And the medical device companies are saying, yes, but if the physician doesn't get paid, and you go out and try to sell him a new ECOS catheter, we'll lose customers really quickly if Nick Anderson and his team convince us that they're not going to get reimbursed. So there was a big shift in the early 2000s that's carried over till now. And every medical device company now of any substantive revenue has a market access and health economics team. If you got to start with one, just start with one. If you want to partner with, Joe, you remember TTI, Beth and April.
Well, let's talk after this. I want to catch up with you on them.
So I'll put a period at this because we're over. But
yeah.
If your team, if you got, $5 million in venture capital, you're developing this, you're moving, why don't you hire TTI and have TTI be your 40 Nick and Sandy's?
They have 40 folks now?
What was that?
They have 40 people there?
No, I'm just saying, yeah, they're pretty close. They're
okay. And anyone on the call, I can get you in touch with who we're talking about. In the spirit of wrapping up, let me ask you quickly, your time is even more limited now that you're a full-time Boston Scientific employee. Have you changed your hourly consulting rate?
Yeah.
What is it now, please?
400. So it was 350 and I went up.
Okay.
It depends on the project. I just signed a consulting agreement with a company for a 5-month consulting agreement for a substantial amount of money, and I'm providing no deliverables. I told them I'm not giving you a single deliverable. All I'm going to do is tell you exactly how this game works for your technology.
Okay.
So
I want to put that in perspective. So Nick typically charges $400 an hour. Any MDG premium member who's coming to 10X can see Nick. His workshop will be $325 for the 3 hours, 2.5 hours with breaks and such. It's going to be included in the rate that I'm charging only MDG premium people before I update the site. So instead of what will likely be a top ticket price of $19.95 plus $325 for Nick plus $325 for Michelle or Rob or any of the other workshops, it's all for $13.95. You save $750. You get 3 hours with Nick and movies and ice cream and hugs if you're a hugger.
Yeah.
We'll call it there. Next week, I may or may not be on the call. It will be Michelle Lott leading us. And I may or may not be on the call because I'm dropping my Zachary off at Boston University. My first is leaving the house, and I've already gotten watery-eyed once this week, so I'm not going to do it now. But Beth was like, really, Joey? I'm like, what? You're not going to? She says, of course I am. She says, we've been working 19 years for this moment, and that only made me more. I'm like, okay, this is going to be tough.
Well, that's great, Joe. That's my alma mater, one of my alma maters. Fantastic place. He'll love it.
I love BU. Speaking from an alum, says Elizabeth Nickel. Okay, there we go. Thanks, everybody. Nick, love you, man. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
See everyone soon, perhaps next week, and if not, the week after. You're in good hands with Michelle.
Yeah.
Be well. Thank you. Bye.